people are feeling stuck. People are feeling stuck. People are feeling a little bit hopeless. Like I said, social media isn't helping out. Money doesn't get you very far. Should you save or should you invest? How much should you save? How much should you invest? Start a company or find yourself a job? Meanwhile, these are all questions that my generation is having because it's not as easy as it was to just go out, find yourself a job, and just have one job. Buenas tardes, and welcome to episode 8, I think, of Chainspotting, where every week I read and review the top stories in money, Bitcoin, crypto, finance, all that sort of stuff. I'm writing to you from the depths of the bloodbath that's happening in the crypto markets right now. Before we carry on, I do want to say, if you're worried about the price, it's because you've got too much of a short-term thinking process in front of you. If you're not worried about the price, it's because you've got money invested in for years, if not decades. Somebody sent me the meme of Dune, where the Jenna Bezeret are talking about we think or we plan in centuries. It's how you got to think. It's how you got to plan. So yeah, keep that in mind. And there's also a tiny other thing. If you're in pain right now, maybe it's because you're overexposed. You've got too much money in the space. Sometimes financial safety is just as important as all other kinds of safety. And sometimes that means not having so much invested, deployed, allocated, assigned to these nascent, volatile, wild instruments. But anyways, I digress. Today, I want to ask that you subscribe, give us a like, comment. Are you too deployed? Do you not have enough Bitcoin? Where's all your feelings and emotions happening as the Trump tariffs tear down the crypto markets? Leave them below. Today's story is something that was really popular with a previous one that I did that's into the broader money financial side of things. That story that I did about millennials are mad at boomers and why. So this is actually a story from CNBC from last year, written by Kamaron McNair. People feel financially worse off than their parents, but say their kids will be better off. There's a lot of different perspectives and sides to it. As we're going to see, there's things that are really not going very well for us. There's things that aren't going as bad for us. I want to say us. It's because this is mostly talking about Gen X and millennials. Gen X sometimes get tossed under the bus and people mostly talk about millennials, but this one talks about both of them. So let's dive into it. Why don't we? One indicator many people use to determine how well they're doing in life is to compare themselves with their parents. After all, your parents' socioeconomic situation can be pretty prescriptive of how you'll fare in life. To do better than them is a common goal for families from a variety of backgrounds. But these days, not too many are accomplishing that goal. The share of people who go on to earn more than their parents has been steadily declining since the 1940s. So World War II, for the people that probably knew that the 1940s were World War II. In fact, just 50% of people born in 1980 have grown up to earn more than their parents, compared with 90% of people born in the 1940s, according to Opportunity Insights research. That's a sizable difference. That's half. And in just 40 years? Well, not half, but like nearly half, like a 40% drop or an 80% drop, is pretty substantial. That's not very good. It makes sense then that just 36.5% of adults say they feel they're better off financially than their parents, according to CNBC's International Your Money Financial Security Survey conducted by SurveyMonkey. A greater share, 42.8%, say they're worse off than their parents, while the remaining 20.7% are saying they're faring about the same. A question that I had while I was reading this paragraph is there's an ideal that you want to be improving and that you want to be doing better than your parents. What happens when your parents are doing well? And I'm not talking about like rich, famous, yeah, super successful, but they've got maybe a side business or a nice business. They're an academic. They've done well for themselves. Maybe you just want to maintain. Maybe you just want to keep up with that lifestyle. I understand the constant aspiration and the wanting to do better, but maybe there are people who look at their parents and think to themselves, you know what, you did pretty all right in life, or you're doing well in life. This is what I want to aspire to because I recognize that I might not need more. I highly recommend the book by the Skidelsky. I think it's Edward Skidelsky and Robert Skidelsky, dad and son, called How Much Is Enough? And how much is enough is a philosophical question that people have been asking themselves for the eons about how much money is enough. Actually, the subtitle for How Much Is Enough is What Makes a Good Life? And the question actually of what is a good life, that's the deeper question. What do you need? Whether that's friends, relationships, sports, food, travel, books, money, and this is I remember reading that book, and there's a bunch of stats that said that people don't ask that question anymore, or much less. So maybe it's a good time to have that conversation with yourself and then with the people that surround you about what is a good life, what constitutes a good life, what would it mean to have a good life, and then you can start building up the blocks to make it there. Maybe you already have it, and you're forgetting to be a little bit grateful about that. Maybe you're far, far, far from it and you start building towards it. So yeah, what is the good life? And actually, why don't you leave me a comment below? What is the good life to you? Some things really are harder for younger generations. No shit, Sherlock. Americans in the 35 to 65-year-old range mostly belong to two generations: Gen X, ages 44 to 59, and Millennials, ages 28 to 43. A variety of factors have made certain financial milestones statistically harder to reach for those groups than they were for baby boomers and the silent generation, who would likely be their parents. Here are three ways younger generations are financially worse off than their older counterparts: wage stagnation, unattainable home ownership, and high education costs and student debt. Why don't we dive into each of them and dissect it, peel away the layers of the onion of wage stagnation?
Layers! Onions have layers. Wage stagnation have layers. Onions have layers? You get it. We both have layers.
To start off with, why don't we? Follow me, please. When adjusted for inflation, wages in the US have barely budged since the 1970s. What the fuck happened in 1971? Yeah, I'll post a graph that shows what happened in 1971 to the money. You're not going to like it. As prices have trickled up with inflation, once strong salaries have lost a lot of their buying power. Has anybody noticed how when you were a kid, a dollar was a shit ton of money, and now a dollar buys nothing? A pack of gum, if you're lucky. So that's what they're talking about here. Now, here they're talking, let me carry on. Millennials and Gen Xers today could be making the same salary their parents did at the same age, but their parents' salaries went much further. This is a big problem. This is a problem that we're seeing across the world, which is wage stagnation. And yeah, prices are increasing. They're not increasing with inflation. They're not keeping up. And not only with inflation, but just upskilling and wages that should be getting better over time, not just because people are printing money. There's something to keep in mind there. Number two, unattainable home ownership. The steady rise in home prices has made it seemingly impossible for many would-be owners, especially millennials, to buy homes. U.S. home prices are 24 times higher in 2024 than they were in 1963, according to a recent study by Clever. Owning a home in and of itself doesn't make you well off or financially secure. But if your parents owned their home at your age and you couldn't afford to buy one, despite earning as much or even more than they did, that could contribute to feeling worse off. There's not a chance in hell I can afford to buy a home right now because I can't pay for the down payments. for a home and the down payment is 10%. But we're talking about homes that cost, it depends on where you go. Like there are places obviously in Santiago or third world countries that you might be able to get a pretty reasonable price, but you still have to put down a down payment. Interest rates are really high at the moment. And yeah, if especially when you, and I think this is what they're alluding to here, you have the tagging on to what your parents got. So think of it. You might have grown up in a 3-bedroom house, maybe 2 floors, something exciting or something nice, garden, that sort of stuff. To be able to aspire to that, we're talking about 100,000, 150,000, 250,000. Not a lot of people have enough to, number one, outright pay for it. So that's out of the question. And then number two, it's even putting the down payment, with 10, 20, 30%, because yeah, well, for starters, a lot of people don't have that kind of savings. Number two, cost of life is super high. So they've got to spend a lot of other money elsewhere. And then, yeah, I don't think that houses are anymore a financial investment as they used to be, despite all the real estate gurus that come out and say the best way for you to get rich and financially independent is to buy a bunch of properties and make it like that.
I bumped into a mentor and another mentor and a few more mentors. I found 5 mentors. Knowledge.
I'm not too sure that's how it works anymore. High education costs and student debt. Though the younger generations have attended college at higher rates than their parents, they're also paying a much higher price. The cost of attendance for 4-year college has jumped 153% in the last 40 years, according to Bankrate. There's also a question, another book that I'd highly recommend, which I think is there among my books, which is The Utopia of Rules by the great David Graeber. May he rest in peace. One of the great left-leaning libertarians or classical anarchists of our modern times. And there's the rise of bullshit managerial positions in places of study. So instead of investing in better libraries, instead of investing in better sports facilities and increasing or improving the quality of the curricula, they decided to build out this massive infrastructure of people, the managerial class in the middle, who take a big slice of the pie. They don't give much back. They just fill life with fucking paperwork, signing papers, and putting rubber stamps and paper stamps and metal stamps on every single thing that we need to do. So that's also contributing a lot to these higher prices. And that's something to keep in mind because that's only going to get worse. And yeah, so there's the question of how much are they paying and what are they paying for? As a result, Gen X and Millennials hold nearly 87% of the country's student debt balance, with Gen X alone holding 57%, according to the Education Debt Initiative. Gen X borrowers also have the highest average loan balance at $44,290. That's a lot. That's like a $4,000 a month salary. Quickly segueing though, the writer or the journalist comes back. Things aren't all bad, though. People like 30-year-olds today are comparing themselves with their parents at 30 and feeling like they're left behind. Tara Umberzat, a certified financial planner and therapist, told CNBC Make It. And to a certain extent, I'm not sure that's true. Here are 3 ways younger generations are doing better than their parents. Number 1, more education. Gen X went to college at a higher rate than previous generations, followed by millennials becoming the most educated generation to date. Do you hear that, my fellow millennials? Nearly 40% of us have at least a bachelor's degree, compared with just 25% of baby boomers, according to Pew Research. I'd like to tag back on to the previous section where I asked, what are we paying for? Sure, we are the most educated, but then what are we studying? I, for example, study political science. Political science is a bullshit career. It's nice. It's interesting. Okay. I'll rewind. It's not a bullshit career, but the problem is the market doesn't know what to do with you. So you become a journalist and you have a podcast and a good friend of mine has a hotel for dogs and all that sort of stuff. And I know on the other side of the screen, people are screaming out, well, that's entrepreneurial and you doing all this other stuff. Sure. But we're going into massive debt to be able to study stuff. And what is that studying doing for us? I'm not too sure. More education almost always translates to higher incomes, which could explain why millennials have more wealth on average at ages 33 and 34 than Gen X and baby boomers did at the same age, according to the St. Louis Fed. Well, that's pretty fucked then, because if we have more money at 33, 34 than Gen X and baby boomers, but we can't pay for fucking houses, or we can't go on travels, or we can't do all this stuff because prices are insanely high for everything right now, what good is it? You tell me in the comments. Better quality of life. Certain products and services we use may be more expensive today, but are often better. Unversagt, I hope I'm not destroying your name, uses buying a car as an example. Compare the cheapest car you can get today versus the cheapest car you could get 20 years ago, she says. The cheapest car today is way better. That's true. Technological advancements, safety standards, and innovation have made things like communication, transportation, healthcare, and more all better for the general population. I don't know, man. Like healthcare, much better. There is massive advancements. That's true. But has coverage expanded? I don't know. I really don't know. And then number 3, more equality. Younger generations have navigated adulthood with more freedoms than a lot of their parents may have had. Today's adults are only a generation or two removed from a time when there were fewer legal protections to help ensure people are treated equally when it comes to their pay, housing opportunities, and lending abilities. Gender and racial pay gaps, along with other barriers to wealth building, certainly still affect Gen X and millennials. But legislation like the Equal Pay Act of 1963, the Fair Housing Act of 1968, and the Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1974 have helped the younger generations avoid some, albeit not all, of the financial hurdles their parents and grandparents may have encountered. That's true. We are living in some pretty pioneering times in a lot of sense, even though sometimes we tend to think it's all lost. This is coming from a white cisgender male, so I understand my privilege and my bias there, but still, it's still a pretty good time to be alive. There's optimism for the next generation. Look up, everybody, for there is light at the end of the tunnel, and it's alluring, enchanting, and attracting. Despite pessimism about their own situation, 42% of adults overall think their kids will be financially better off than they are, CNBC survey found. That number drops to 40% among adults aged 35 to 64. Current parents are even more likely to believe in their children's prospects, with 59% of survey respondents with kids saying their offspring will be better off financially. Just 1 in 5 parents say they think their children will be worse off. We're a hopeful bunch. An inheritance could give those children a head start and help them build on their parents' financial success. Over 75% of respondents say they plan to leave their future children money in their will. For those of you that are new and for those of you that are old, there is a article that I read and reviewed, and you can link it here. You can click it there, which is why millennials are mad at boomers for exactly that. Boomers at the moment, they hold $78 trillion. I think it was 50 something percent of like all the assets or all the wealth in the US. I don't even want to think about how concentrated that is in emerging markets or other places of the world. And there's a lot of anger among millennials that why not give your kids more money in life? Why do you have to wait for you to die before you start handing over the cold hard cash? And I'm undecided where I stand on this. I think that we should just start with the conversation, start talking about these ideas. What should you do? Have you spoken to your parents? What sort of will do they have? Inheritance, all that sort of stuff. Talk to your siblings. What would you like to do with money if you could get a bunch of money out of nowhere? All this sort of stuff. So That's important to keep in mind. That's where I would lean, not necessarily going out and being like, you need to give me money, or you are part of the lazy generation, so you don't deserve any money and all this. Because truth be told, parents, you're going to die one day, unfortunately, and you're going to leave your kids money, I suppose, if you can. So why wait till you die before you even talk about it? And you say, no, I'm not going to give them anything because they need to work. They're going to get it eventually. Whether they get it now or later and they did the work later, that's another thing. But maybe there's things that can make their life better right now and your life better as well. Leaving that money behind isn't what matters most, though. Their kid landing a secure job is the most important factor to ensure a better financial outcome, according to 43% of parents surveyed. A fully funded education was the next most important, 20%, followed by an inheritance, 15%. I have a lot of qualms with the last bit. For example, I was talking about this with a friend of mine the other day who's an entrepreneur, not entirely successful, but he does all right for himself. Company's growing. He pays himself a decent salary, all that sort of stuff. And he was saying, and this is like a common meme within like the entrepreneurial bro culture, that a salary is the most dangerous drug, and a financially stable, secure job is a dangerous drug because you get comfortable. And when you get comfortable, verbiage. I do think that you should ask yourself whether a secure job is what you actually want or if it's not. And then there's another thing that Ronnie Chang, famed comedian, was making fun of this idea recently. And there is a lot of anger among millennials, rightfully so, because there was an inherent promise to us made, not maybe explicit, but there was an inherent promise that if you went through certain stages, certain processes, did the right things, did the things you were told, go to school, study, get a higher education, find a job, save a little bit of money, then you would have certain things in life, just like your parents. But guess what? The world changed along the way, and now that's not true. Now you go to university, and it's not entirely sure what you went to university for. You make a reasonable salary, but costs of living is so high that you can't really do anything. There's huge disruption in social fabric. Social media is making us completely isolated amongst everybody else. So there's a bunch of questions, but I think the main one here is that you need to think, yes, there are things to be optimistic for, of course. There are things that are better now, of course. There are things that are worse now, of course. What should we do? I don't know. But there's some important points to be made here. I think mostly along the lines of people are feeling stuck. People are feeling stuck. People are feeling a little bit hopeless. Like I said, social media isn't helping out. Money doesn't get you very far. Should you save or should you invest? How much should you save? How much should you invest? Should you go into start a company or find yourself a job meanwhile? These are all questions that my generation is having because it's not as easy as it was to just go out, find yourself a job, and just have one job. I talked about this previously in another episode. My generation is the 2, 3, 4 jobs. Not everybody is doing full-time jobs, of course, although I do know people who are juggling full-time jobs, arbitraging the remote work, but a lot of people have side gigs. That's very, very common nowadays. Very, very common. Not necessarily because they want to, although a vast majority do, but because they have to, because money doesn't get them anywhere. And you still want to travel. You still want to build a family. You still want to be able to go out and buy something if you want to go out. You still want to go out with your friends. You still want to gift things to the people that you love. So, yeah, things to keep in mind when you're talking to millennials or boomers or Gen X, that times are tough, especially for everybody, but millennials and Gen X have had to live through 2 once-in-a-lifetime economic crisis and a very exponentially, rapidly changing world. So yeah, keep that in mind. Drop me your comments below. Let me know what you think. Share it, like it, give us a subscribe. I'll read you next week. And remember, choose your news.